Yes, people, we're here once again, and of course, we're joined by Richard Rowe on the Big Bad Station with yours truly, DJKat the Kat-a-lyst. So, of course, Richard Rowe, whenever you're ready, introduce yourself and let the people know what you're going to talk about.
Hi, thank you very much for having me. Yes, my name is Richard Rowe. I'm a retired ex-accountant, worked in industry all my life, white British. All my family are white British. And so I'm a local lad in every sense. I've been in Coventry about 50 years. Okay. I looked after my family, as you do, and, friends and neighbours and work colleagues. But when I retired, I thought, you see things on the news, and I thought there are people who are going through very bad times, and I'm sure there's something that I can do. Yeah. So I then joined the Coventry Refugee and Migrant Centre, and as an unpaid volunteer. And the interesting thing is, although I was fairly experienced of life, say in the UK, actually I found I didn't really understand the problems, and I didn't know much about the solutions. Yeah. So actually I wasn't very useful to them initially, and I've had to unlearn some things and then learn a lot more. And in that process, I found it personally extremely rewarding. What triggered me writing a story, which I've again almost finished, is called Prisoners of Beliefs.
Yeah.
And it's about how people they interpret the world based on the belief system that they have. So people with different beliefs can interpret the same event completely differently.
Yeah.
And that's what triggered it is the Belgrade Theatre in Coventry wanted some migrant stories. And because I knew the guys, they said, do you want to go along and encourage them? We had about half a dozen goes, never really took up. So I then decided I said, well, I thought I can write a story, which is a bit presumptuous of me because I've never written anything since I was at school, which is obviously a long time ago. So I then started a story. I thought it'd take me a couple of months. I'm now in my 7th year and it's about to be published.
Wow.
The actual theme is, if you think of Sherlock Holmes and people like that, the hero, if you like, is a black African. He escapes from a war zone, crosses the Sahara Desert, which is a horrendous experience. He then gets on an inflatable boat to cross the Mediterranean, crosses Europe, ends up in the UK, applies for right to remain, and he then is allocated a room by the Home Office for on his own in a house of other immigrants, different countries. Nobody knows anybody, and people don't mix. He is on his own. He's got no money, no friends, nothing to occupy his mind. He's not allowed to work because of the Home Office rules, and he's going out of his mind. He then goes to the library, and he reads up on all sorts of subjects. And in effect, that's a parallel with my experience. I couldn't write anything if I didn't know anything. And so it's been quite a learning curve for me. Now, he gets right to remain. He joins, he gets a job in a factory. He's on minimum wage, doing an incredibly boring job, and he's going completely spare. It's sort of eating his brain from the inside.
Yeah.
He then makes a suggestion as to how things could be improved. He saves the company loads of money, and the owner is so pleased he wants to reward this guy in front of the other workers and say, well, he's just arrived and he can do it. Yeah. He gives him a cheque for £500 and realises that this guy is not only very bright, he thinks differently. The owner is a self-made English multimillionaire, and he thinks if he can do it, anybody can.
Okay.
So he Carl, who is the African guy, then joins the offices, and this is scene 63. It's called The Suit, and the two scenes I'd like to read out tonight. One of them is The Suit, which is how British society works, and many things are not actually articulated, but they're still there, and they determine our behaviour. Yeah. And then the second one he meets an old guy, production manager, who's about to retire, doesn't want any change in his life, no challenges, and deeply resents migrants coming in. But he's in your face, and he will tell you what he thinks, and he doesn't care whether it's politically correct. So you've got two contrasting scenes. Yeah. So the first one, scene 63, is called The Suit. Leaving the shop floor, Carl joins a new team in the offices. Production tasks are tightly measured with physical and daily quotas. In this new environment, memories of the target-driven and remorseless grind of the old job quickly fade, to be replaced by new anxieties that are less visible or controllable. Office world rules are assumed, often unwritten or articulated. Oblique references are all that is required because it is assumed that everybody knows their place. The British class system is so embedded into the fabric of the organisation that business is conducted through role play by threads so thin they are undetectable to the casual observer. Even people from different countries are infected, suppressing their identity as a prerequisite for admission to the world of employment, respectability and opportunity. The first challenge is to acquire a uniform to convey the message you want others to see, either for camouflage or peacocking. A uniform to give the appearance that everything is the same, and camouflage to disguise the differences. Carl needs both. The £500 suggestion scheme money facilitates his ambition, and he ventures into the British men's clothing shops for the first time in his life to investigate the possibilities. The shopping list must include a suit, where he discovers a dapper little number that feels like it should belong to somebody else. Shoes, they have to be black. Shirt, white would look unflamboyant and unchallenging, very important as a newcomer, and will pass unnoticed, ticking one of the unwritten rules. Ties, more than one, you cannot wear the same tie 2 days running, it implies poverty. Many offerings are entertaining but inappropriate. He settles for 3, plain and dull, another box ticked. Business socks, but what colour? Black, of course, to go with the shoes. In total, he spends £350 and tries to convince himself that this is an investment. In his previous world, this is a fortune, and for what? To join a club whose membership holds no interest for him. Still, the suit fits well, and the enforced diet of the last few years has gifted him a slim, athletic build. The mirror reflects a sharp-suited, dynamic businessman. Time to fool the masses. The impact is instant and electrifying. By signalling his compliance to social norms, he could not avoid the conclusion that in the eyes of his new colleagues, the suit had created a different person, competent, serious, well-organised and purposeful. This is a tremendous boost to his confidence and reminds him of a quote from Albert Einstein. Small is the number of people who see with their eyes and think with their minds. Shallow though it is, there is a secret pleasure in being accredited with virtues instead of summarily dismissed with disdain. The suit has transported him to the land of plenty, where abundance is assumed and subtly displayed, or its absence concealed. His life's experiences to date leave him ill-equipped and initially disorientated in his dealings with the formal administrative departments and expectations of the status-conscious employees that make up a modern commercial organisation. This is a challenging psychological journey, but one that he is committed to completing. Focusing on issues raised, evidence available, and actions implemented, Carl gradually notices that an initial display of open positivity seems to be a cardinal requirement to demonstrate commitment to the team. But when the words stop, so do the actions, as if the words are only the official version for the naive and those avoiding responsibility. It's not that people say no, it's just that things do not happen. The ambitious who want to survive and prosper tune their antennae into managing threats, which manifest as supporting suggestions that benefit themselves whilst avoiding any additional risk, inconvenience or responsibility, in which case the response involves positively accepting the worthiness of new ideas, whilst during later discussions presenting the benefits of the status quo and the risks of change. Office jealousies create an undercurrent that masquerades as the Freudian subconscious controlling the conscious. In truth, motives and actions are deliberate and calculating. It is only when lines are crossed that articulation exposes the subterfuge. Carl is a raw recruit whose suit has allowed him entry into this world, but he has another suit and it's made of armour. Everyone knows that the new arrival has the ear of the boss, and so, for the moment, he is untouchable. Subversion is the order of the day, and invisible defensive poses are maintained by all whilst displaying another of their strengths, patience. Much later, he would ruminate on the similarities between the unspoken truths that explain how the commercial world really works and the actions of the empire builders, both political and economic, where self-interest determines actions which are later rationalised away, extolling virtue and consistency. His move from factory to office is almost a metaphor of the two worlds of Africa and Europe. This is certainly true of the ethnicity of the employees. Although the employees on the shop floor were overwhelmingly East European with some African and Asian, moving into the offices, there were no non-white senior managers or directors, and with only a smattering of non-white employees, mostly in junior or minor supervisory roles. As a traditional British engineering company, everyone accepted this as normal. A few of these ethnic minorities behaved as if they were trying to outdo the British for Britishness. Was this class, history, racism? It dawned on Carl that it was none of them, because it was all of them. Strange indeed. That's the end of the scene.
Wow.
I don't know what you think.
Yeah, it's very powerful. I feel like pretty much everyone in theory could relate to that, I think, personally.
Well, yeah, I mean, you've only got to look at, if you look at what he said, say in this country, then everybody has equal rights. If you then do any analysis, you find that the rights may be in law, but people's behaviour is very different, and a lot of, particularly through political correctness, it's not polite to discuss.
Yeah. So
you can be in a world that's actually quite false, and this is what he's observing as a newcomer coming in.
Yeah, 100%.
The second scene is called George Wright, and this is the production manager, and he is extremely vocal and massively prejudiced. So this is in your face.
Okay.
Right, scene 72, George Wright. George Wright was production manager under Charles's father, and can remember Charles as a young schoolboy visiting the factory during his holidays. After a lifetime of service, George is due to retire in a couple of years, but Charles needs to make changes. He needs to make them now if he's going to keep ahead of his competitors, and George resists everything new. A different approach might crack an old nut, and with a wry smile, he suggests Carl works with the production manager on opportunities for productivity improvements. Carl's curiosity is raised by the comment, "This will challenge even you." Charles has given Carl some ideas for improvement, which he would like discussed with the production manager. Approaching his office, Carl knocks on the door and enters. He is greeted by a scowling, brazen-skinned, heavy-jowled face resembling a disapproving frog, decorated by a substantial moustache, crowning an over-proportioned body. Maybe he is more like the descendant of a now extinct walrus. His intrusion is not welcome. "Yes?" the walrus growls. "Hello, my name is Carl. Charles suggested that I come and talk to you about opportunities for improvement. I know who you are. What do you know about the industry?" "Not much." "Well, don't you think you should find out before you come in here wasting my time? I'm a very busy man." This defensive approach seemed to imply that without specialist knowledge, it was impossible for anybody to understand the issues. Carl was surprised how easy he had found it to identify problems, which once defined, generally suggested its own solutions. "If you could spare 15 minutes, that would be a start." "I have to finish this production schedule. Come back at 3:45. Since the boss had requested the meeting, this appeared active obstruction. Carl is dismissed, and the production manager's eyes return to the papers strewn over his desk, the confused expression on his face reminding Carl of an old man he'd seen in the library trying to send an email. George certainly lived up to his reputation. Charles had described him as a man who gets things done, but his way, and as solid as a rock. Certainly, Carl had witnessed the granite, but he was also certain that the production scheduling could be handled more efficiently by a simple computer program. George, a rather limited man, had always craved respect, clinging to everything that he believed reflected his status and entitlement. He has never been afflicted with self-doubt or humility, his supercilious manner being that of a butler to a great lord, assuming all the pomp of somebody he knows with the authority of a self-appointed defender of the unwritten rules. The price, not visible to him, entraps him in a role defending what nobody else wants. In George's mind, this merely confirms the need to maintain standards, but the effect is to reinforce his isolation, turning a bad habit into a siege mentality and making any alternative seem too risky. He is riddled with Britishness, a royalist to the core, always standing on higher moral grounds. He once overheard himself being referred to as PLS. When the subordinate was questioned about the remark, his quick wit explained it stood for Production Leads Sales. This reaffirmed his self-belief, for as he always says, if I don't make it, they can't sell it. To everyone else, PLS stood for Pompous Little Shit. 3:45 p.m. arrives and Carl knocks on the door. Excuse me, are you free? Without ceremony or grace, George snaps, sit down, what do you want? Charles asked me to look at the possibility of moving towards just-in-time production. Exasperated, George hurls back his response. What? That old chestnut? Exhaling fire and steam. Maybe he's an extinct dragon, not a walrus, but still unknown to science. I've told Charles it's a waste of time and he won't listen. Investing in expensive systems will be uneconomic as long as he keeps employing cheap foreign labour, impoverishing our economy and keeping the British unemployed. Carl is shocked by this obvious frontal assault on a non-white, non-British member of the company. Defending himself, Carl answers, foreign workers do not cause unemployment, they create wealth in the communities they work in and support many key parts of the economy, like agriculture, construction and healthcare. Balderdash, of course they do. Big companies are always announcing mass redundancies, and British people who've worked for years find themselves on the scrap heap. They only get offered low-paid jobs competing with foreigners. Carl is forced to correct this misrepresentation. You are confusing immigration with automation. America lost 5 million manufacturing jobs in 10 years, but 85% were due to automation, only 15% to factories moving overseas. When multinationals announce thousands of redundancies, it's not to hire immigrants. You can do all your banking without meeting a bank clerk and all your shopping without meeting a shop assistant. In the UK, low-paid foreigners create more jobs by increasing demand. They help maintain UK competitiveness in export markets, pay PAYE and fill the jobs the British don't want. It's the young foreign workers who care for the retired British. You make them sound like bloody saints. You obviously haven't been in England long enough to know the facts. Migration has always brought enormous benefits. America was built on immigration, and it is not only people that migrate, but ideas, culture, science, everything that drives civilization forward. George growls, drives it into the ground more like. You can't deny that the low-paid are suffering because of the numbers of foreigners willing to work for nothing, and many of the middle classes are being pushed into low-paid jobs because they cannot get any better. As I said, that is caused by automation, not immigration. It's undeniable that the recent high volumes of immigrants have caused some social reaction to the practical problems in the short term, and sometimes they're not always handled very well. But it's an illusion to think that things will get better if immigration stops. During the Industrial Revolution, many thousands lost their jobs, but who wants to go back to Victorian times? Migration offers new challenges, producing new solutions. These changes will not always benefit the individual, but will enrich the society on which all individuals depend. It is the same gift to future generations that parents sacrifice for their children in the hope that their lives will be better. George has been silent longer than his patience can tolerate. Yes, we sacrifice it for our children, not everybody else's. If you lot ran your own countries properly, you wouldn't need to come over here. Carl has to stand his ground. The British felt that they had the right to go anywhere in the world. Well, we didn't expect you to follow us home, he says, with unwitting irony. And there's too many of you for this small island. We've given you freedom, developed your economies, and are still your biggest customers. What more do you want? George's jaw is set firm as he glares at Carl. You judge me by your impression of the country I am from. In which country are all the individuals good and which all bad? If you decide the person you think I am when you don't know me, you deny me my humanity. And if you act on your prejudices, you may make some very poor judgments that damage both of us. Although he had run out of arguments, George is not a believer. Just because this uninvited intruder has come up with some smart-ass comments doesn't mean that the man is of any standing. He's from bloody Africa, for God's sake. The bloody man's lucky to be here without spouting all this ungrateful claptrap. All he can think of saying is, well, I'm a traditionalist and proud of Britain. On the wall, there's a picture of the Queen, and unmistakably, only a few places behind is George as a younger man. Ah, yes, tradition. It is important. I presume you're a royalist. I certainly am. George, like the kings of England. Quite so. Continuing, you know that King George I was born in Germany. Maybe so, but that was a long time ago. And King George II was born in Germany. The silent hostility is worth its weight in gold, and Carl could not resist maximising his verbal supremacy as he continues. And George III was also King of Hanover, as was George IV. And George V changed his name from the House of Saxe-Coburg to the House of Windsor. It's good to see that you are upholding the British tradition of adapting to foreign influences. George sits in sullen silence. Now motoring, this is no time to stop. By the way, congratulations on the Industrial Revolution. What do you mean? You seem to be taking personal credit for it. And well done on winning the Second World War. Remind me, what exactly was your part in it? Don't be bloody stupid, I wasn't even born then. Ah, that's a relief. So you won't be taking the blame for the Kenyan detention centres of the 1950s, or complicity in the Bengal famine of 1943, or the rape and murder of many indigenous peoples in the process of building an empire. I'm a bit confused. What have any of these events got to do with you or your assumed superiority? The silence is now deafening. Eventually, George replies, they are the successes of a society of which I am a member. Carl gives a deep sigh of regret. Oh dear. So you are taking responsibility for the atrocities perpetuated by the empire builders, which have appalling consequences on the lives of hundreds of millions today. In which case, what are you going to do about it? With a face of stone, George replies, nothing, it's not my problem. Then it is others who will have to deal with the consequences, and you will be a bystander, clinging to your hand-me-down values and cursing the world as events pass you by. This is not the sort of conversation that George is used to, and confirms that Carl is an enemy. He always had been, but now George has something specific to focus his dislike on. The meeting has achieved nothing apart from baiting a walrus. George is stuck in a time warp of unquestioning acceptance of the stories of the glory and superiority of the British Empire, sustained by the rose-tinted glasses of famous leaders, military victories, often against other European pirates, and extravagant displays of power and wealth, epitomised by huge exalted buildings constructed all over the empire. The pride and assumption that the British Empire was a good thing is now tainted with the evidence of the crushing of local cultures by the invaders' superior technology, industrial power, and arrogant self-belief. This myth was portrayed as public duty, benevolence, and civilizing the savage native. Amnesia is the privilege of the powerful, but one way or another, we all live and die with the consequences. A quote from Gary Young, The Guardian, 31st of May, 2019. Humans have short lives, giving the impression of continuity, but nearly everything that they believe demonstrates continuity was created before they were born by people they have never met, from places they have never been to, all gifted by nature. George is equally unaware of the past influences that have created his present and the natural and stable order that he takes for granted. He is unaware that today will not last forever, nor that his inability to recognise the inevitability of change would condemn him to the dustbin of history. What he is desperate to hold on to is impossible to preserve. His rigid resistance would guarantee failure, not necessarily in his lifetime, but in the attitudes he might successfully pass on. It has as much chance of success as wishing a glorious summer's day would last forever, without realising that this beauty would not exist without the other seasons. These simplified myths help create a mindset that is completely ill-equipped to deal with evolving challenges. When the mind is closed, the eyes are blind. As Gary Young wrote, only the whole truth about the past can heal the present, and George's universe has shrunk to the size of his head and become a prison. Carl reflects on Charles's comment. George was indeed solid as a rock. He was igneous that cannot metamorphose. And that's the end of that scene.
Wow, that's a very powerful one.
Some people will be offended by that. And that's not really the point. The point is it true? And it's not that this is representative of British attitudes, but it is representative of some people's attitudes within this country. And in order to move forward, you have to address these issues. That's why it's put in such stark contrast, and it's completely different from him joining the office and living in a world that's politically correct.
Yeah, 100%. I feel like sometimes it's the reality that a lot of us face, so people might be offended, but it's the reality that a lot of us do face.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it needs to be understood and discussed. It's not that people have to form the same idea, but they need to be able to discuss with people who have different ideas. And I mean, if you look at say industrialization and capitalism, I mean they've been very successful. Yeah. But part of the success has now produced major problems. And one of the problems with say capitalism, it likes to standardize everything, and including nature. Whereas if you look at the history of life, biodiversity has always been ever evolving and becoming more complex. And you can't put yourself above nature, because in the end, you can't sustain yourself. Yeah. And that's a major issue that we need to address. And, you know, migrants who come over here, many of them know what the problems are firsthand. Many of the British who've never lived abroad or travelled very much, I don't think understand. And if they do, they might understand, if you like, as an intellectual argument, but they don't relate it to them changing their lifestyle, which is absolutely vital. And to that extent, many migrants, with their broad experiences of a whole range of things, have a very important and valuable contribution. It is really important. So, I mean, that's. I put those two scenes together because I think it tries to display the contrast between living in society where everything appears fine, normal, and okay, and many of the realities, and some of those realities actually camouflage or hide a lot of ignorance and prejudice.
Definitely, 100% agree with that.
So anyway, I mean, that's it. I hope that wasn't too long and rambling, but it really is meant to be in your face, and you can't avoid it.
Yeah.
And there are people who have all sorts of opinions. Some of it's based on some evidence. The problem is it's not a balanced view. And the other thing that a lot of these arguments are about, they don't come up with solutions.
Yeah.
It's okay coming up with an opinion, blurting it out and saying, oh, well, why should we change? Well, the reality is that we will make our lives worse going forward if we don't change. We have no choice.
Definitely, 100%. And of course, tell the listeners, how can we get this book when it comes out?
Well, it will be on Amazon. I'm going to try and get it into local bookshops. I've met some people recently who seem very keen on what I'm doing, and they're suggesting public displays in Coventry, maybe the Herbert Art Gallery and places like that. And one lady suggested, I haven't pursued the conversation yet, but it might be quite good if I was on television. And I said, yeah, absolutely. If there's an opportunity, I'm very happy to offer what I know and what I think, and then people can make their own minds up and either, disagree, or maybe it makes them think, and, they need to change their behaviour. We all do.
Yeah.
So that's where I'm at the moment.
Wow. I'm definitely looking forward to having a physical copy. Because
I'll give you a signed copy, signed by the author.
That would be great, because a lot of the stories are very powerful and very real. So I appreciate that. Well,
that's what I hope. I mean, it's to deal with what is real and what actually happens. I mean, and the other thing is not to be depressing, talking about problems. It's saying these are problems that do exist, and we need to look for solutions.
Yeah.
And I hope if people think about it, I hope it gives them confidence about taking some responsibility themselves for improving their own lives and also improving society in general. Yeah. And to that extent, we all have a vested interdependence, which is absolutely essential if we're going to be successful going forward.
Definitely, 100% agree.
No, well, thank you very much indeed. That was well, I enjoyed it anyway.
Yes, it was a great session, and again, I'm looking forward to the next ones. I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you very much indeed.
Anytime.
Lovely.
You're always welcome. Thank you again.
Okay. Cheers. See you, Katrina.
See you later. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Yes, people, I hope you enjoyed listening to those stories. Again, very powerful. Just want to apologise because there was 1 or 2 swear words in the second story. However, it was very impactful. So thank you again to Richard Rowe for coming on and talking to us about his stories and what he's found out. It's always a blessing.